So as I said, I was invited to do a potluck, and I told people, no, I don't do drugs. But they said, no, it's more like a dinner party. And so, but you don't have to bring a dish, We'll prepare something for you. What kind of diet are you on? And I thought, you don't ask a woman that. I am always dieting, but do I look bad? So anyway, I just thought you needed your joke for the afternoon. I did write this out because like most speakers up here, I have, hours of things that I'd like to share with you, and I only have 15 minutes. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the 10-day local food challenge, which you probably have heard about in some way or another, or you're going to now, and a little bit about this idea, this new frame I have for a diet that comes out of local eating. And then I want to talk to you about where I live, because the charge is talking about community as currency. And I don't mean to, I'm not bragging about where I live, although we on Whidbey Island meet each other on the street and in the grocery store, and at least once a day, we look at each other and we're like, isn't this cool? This is the coolest place. We live here. But I do want to talk about qualities of that community that is, I wouldn't dare say it's re-indigenizing, but it actually, if you stay put, as one of our speakers said, you stay put, you be someplace long, you belong to something. And when you belong to a people in a place, you begin to love it in a way that you don't when you're consuming places. Do I look good at Los Angeles, or would I be better in San Francisco? What do you think? So that's the roadmap. Starting out with local food, in September 2010, I went on a diet. I didn't count calories, I didn't count carbs. I simply took 12,500 miles of food off my plate. I chose to eat for simply 30 days within 10 miles of my home. I did it in service to sustainability. I've been a sustainability activist for 30 years. And then I got ill. I moved to Whidbey Island. I quit being a 24/7 activist, and I settled down and in. But sometime in that period of time, unfortunately, I read Richard Heinberg's book, The Party's Over, and the party was over for me because I was sort of like the activist in me re-engaged, because I started thinking about the vulnerability of this island's food system. I asked a farmer friend, could we here on Whidbey Island feed ourselves from Whidbey Island? And she fundamentally said, sure, for 2 weeks in August. So, yeah, that's a laugh line, but this is the condition of your food system. I guarantee, no matter how cool Oregon is, cooler than Whidbey, I know, but most of us depend on the global industrial corporate food system for 90% of our food. One of the people who did the 10-day local food challenge at the end, she wrote me and she said, local food is all the buzz, and 90% of the time it's a lie. So anyway, I decided I was going to test the sufficiency of my local food system by doing this 10-mile diet. And I said to the farmer who was primarily feeding me, I said, we'll blog for food. So I had 25,000 words at the end of the month. Eventually, that became the book, Blessing the Hands That Feed Us. And one of the things I discovered was that not only did I transform myself as an eater, but I transformed my relationship with the systems that feed me. I went from being an anywhere, anytime, anything eater in the vast food courts of the world, where we don't have to lift a finger really, except for, typing at our jobs to earn the money to buy the food. But we really have, most of us, I know you're an exception because you all grow your own food, but the other people who are outside this building have no relationship with the food that we eat. We just expect it to be there at all times, in all places. That's the world we live in. So this experiment revealed to me both the hidden treasures of my food system and also the insufficiency of my food system, the gaping hole. Somebody today was talking about knowing your farmer, but basically it's not about knowing your farmer as some sort of pleasant experience if you remember to go to the farmer's market. It's that your farmer has issues. Your farmer is not making money. There's very few farmers who do not have... Almost every farmer has to have off-farm income in order to survive. Your farmers are farming in a situation where they can't afford land. Young people want to farm. People are aging out of farming. The average age of farmer is 57. We have so many barriers in the food system, in our food systems, to actually being able to fulfill on the idea of eating local food. And up to and including where I got when I was investigating this is, we really have to question private property if we're going to take a look at feeding the people. So I did this diet, and I called it relational eating because I had an experience one day halfway through the diet in my backyard where I realized I no longer think that food is in the store. I think I'm an eater, and food is arrayed all around me, and most of it I have no idea what it is, or I don't have the competency to bring it to me. It was a vulnerability, but it was also a sense of profound belonging. Like my life depends on my life flourishes if my place flourishes. So that became a commitment to my place and to relational eating. There is no such thing as a lone eater, even though it seems that way when you're in front of the refrigerator at 9 o'clock at night with a spoon in your hand eating leftovers. It seems like you're alone. But we are all relational eaters. We are all eaters in context. So I published the book and went out on the road and told my funny stories. And people started wanting to know, how did you do this? I mean, how can I do this? How can it go from being Vicki as a funny story to something that people is actionable? So last summer, I created this little game. And I believe that sustainability is meant to be lived. It's not meant to simply be talked about. It's not meant for me to stand up here and you sit there. No, we got to dig in. So here's the game. For 10 days, I say in harvest season, but you can pick any time, eat food grown within 100 miles of your home. Oh, no, I can't live without coffee. Okay, giving yourself 10 exotics, foods from afar you can't live without. Come to our website. I think some of you have the little cards, localfood.org. Come to our website, take the opening survey, find out, just report on who you are as an eater. And then do it, join the Facebook group, tell your stories, and take a survey at the end. It is a collaborative learning process. Nobody knows how to do it. Failure is as good as success. So that's the 10-day local food challenge. And what we found out is, at the end of it, when we did our surveys, barriers are people don't know how to cook. They don't know what to do with their CSA box. Not you out there. Those people don't know how to do it. People think that they don't have the money for it. They think it's expensive, and they don't have the time. So we, the eaters, can participate in the transformation of our food system through all of our social roles, for all of our buying, not just voting with our dollars at the farmers markets, but voting with our mouths at the grocery store. Where did the cauliflower come from? Thanks for going and finding out. Now, where did the broccoli come from? So what I'd love to have eaters do is transform themselves into eater activists. We need to array ourselves out there always. So I was thinking about and talking and trying to develop this little meme. I thought that really what we're talking about is a slow diet. And S could be for sustainability, eating in a way that actually replenishes the earth. It could also be for soil. Replenishing soil is the basis of all food. Soil is also a carbon sink if it's tended correctly. Soil is crucial to climate change. It could be sufficiency, eating enough and not too much. So S is for sustainability. L is for local. What does local mean? It's not like, oh, it was 10 and a half miles, I can't eat it. No, local is about community. It's about the currency of community. It's the currency of love and mutual aid and mutual care, and I'll get to that in a second. And it's also about local economies, an economy that's sufficient so that young people can raise families there and old people can age in place. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about with Whidbey Island. O is for organic, grown appropriately, you all know that. And H is for wholesome. that it's actually nourishing. It's also for whole, that it's whole food that you actually participate with in cooking. And it's also for work. Whose hands brought you this food? What is their life like? So it becomes a justice issue also. So it's like a question of a slow diet, sustainable, local, organic, and wholesome, and work. Okay, so, and in fact, just by the way, I did lose weight. But, so I want to now talk a little bit about my place on Earth and on Whidbey Island and how this local food challenge, this one I did, turned my attention to belonging there. And when I moved there, and when I was ill, and I moved there, and I'd given up, all my social roles, and the first thing I said is, this feels like high school, because it was a place. The place itself holds a diversity of people in a container of wholeness. I used to joke that I may be the village idiot, but I'm their village idiot. And it's also being in a container like that, and being there for now 10 years, what I've discovered about belonging is that if you belong somewhere, if you commit yourself to a place on earth and a people who live there, whether you like them or not, they sort of know your business. They're polite in not telling you that. But it's a place where you experiment and fail and pick yourself up and are reabsorbed into the community. There is no away in a place like that. You are part of it, and you're actually, the capacity of your community to know you and forgive you is the community knowing itself as a community. These are qualities. And I used to call where I live in a town of 1,000 people, and it's sort of about 3,000 people orient around this little town center called Langley. I used to call it co-housing without the meetings. And when I first got there, being a global activist, I thought there's a lot of things that could change in this place, and I know how to do it. So and I remember asking somebody a ridiculous question of who's in charge. Like, who do I go talk to with my big ideas, which I now know completely comes out of privilege, that thought. But it turns out it's an organism. Nobody runs this joint. So you have to be part of it. You have to allow yourself to be known. You have to whittle away your ego. You have to allow yourself to move with the community. And I know a lot of people with big ideas who come on the island and they try to do their big ideas and everybody goes, well, they'll get over it. And until you belong there, until you become a participant, and you chat in the market and you meet people in the post office and you go to the parties and you go to the street dance and you participate in the festivals and you bump into each other at the farmer's market, and you go to the community meeting. And until you do those activities, you're not really wearing the community like yourself. So basically, staying put and becoming a useful, loving, failed, quirky person becomes the way you identify. It's such a funny thing to try to explain this experience, because I really do think it's like recreating what's been lost. And a part of it is simply staying put. And if you do this 10-day local food challenge, you will start to bond with your place like you have never bonded before, because you are depending on it for your very life. I realized I'd never lived anywhere because I'd never lived from there. I had worn everything like decoration. I was so privileged that I could move around in that way. I have 1 minute. So I just want to talk briefly in my last minute. We have a food bank, and 25% of the families on the island in a year eat from the food bank. We all know that it's not there but for fortune. It's that at some point we're all going to cycle through need, and we're all going to cycle through capacity, and that's how it is. And I want to talk a little bit, just slowly, that, we've been talking here about scale and smaller scale. And how do we create, whether you live on an island or not, how do you create a boundary in your world, a boundary that holds energy, a boundary that can create value and belonging? You know, whether it's your neighborhood or your church, something that creates centration, that creates a place where you belong. And you slow down, guaranteed in an island, you know, in the summer with the ferries, you slow down and you're quiet. So there's something about place and committing to place that creates a currency where you know that you can never fail and you will never fall. That is the most amazing feeling. I'm going to finish by reading this grace that from Thich Nhat Hanh that I love and I think carries the message. This food is the gift of the whole universe, the earth, the sky, and much hard work. May we live in a way that makes us worthy to receive it. May we transform our unskillful states of mind, especially our greed. May we take only food that nourishes us and prevents illness. We accept this food so that we may realize the path of practice. So I would suggest to you the path of practice is the path of place and belonging and food.
more toxic to happiness than inequality. So that's the start. But then you can have a good quality of life, a good well-being, and not be happy. And that's where the personal side comes in. For instance, you could have enough leisure time, but if you use all that time to watch television, you're not likely to be happier, you're likely to be more stressed, and all of those things. And so what we need in between well-being and happiness is a set of things called happiness skills. We need to learn to be grateful. We need to learn to be tolerant. We need to learn to be patient. We need to learn all kinds of things like that. And then we need to figure out how to measure these things because unfortunately in our society we get what we measure. So there are some measurements. Gallup measures happiness, for example. There's a thing also called the GNH index that you can check out here in the States if you go to the website happycounts.org and take the survey. It takes 15 minutes. It'll give you a score on the 10 domains of well-being that Bhutan pays attention to. So I suggest that you do that. But what does Gallup show? Poll after poll in Gallup shows that a number of countries come out on top in the well-being scores or the happiness scores, however you want to call them. And those are primarily countries in Northern Europe, led by Denmark, but also including Sweden, Norway, and the Netherlands, and so forth. What do these happy countries have in common? Well, number one, they are among the world's most egalitarian countries. They have the smallest gap between rich and poor. They have strong social safety nets. They design their cities around bikes and walking and human connection and not around the automobile. They pay the highest taxes in the world. They pay the highest taxes in the world, and they have the shortest working hours in the world, the most leisure time. And all of these things, of course, as Helena mentioned to me, are under attack because as the U.S. model and the model of globalization and cutting and all of these things come forth, all of this sort of thing is under attack. So we need to defend these things. We need to really think about these very specific things that help in making people happy and which the data shows that. We will find that time and time balance is really central to this, that the shorter working hours is a huge part of this, and it's something we need to think about because if we want to grow our own food and take time to eat right and take time to exercise and all of these things, then we can't be working the horrendous hours that people are working in the United States. We can't do it. We are absolutely harried and rushed. We work more than people in almost any other country. We are the only rich nation in the world that has no guarantee of paid leave when a mother has a baby, no guarantee of sick leave when you get sick from work, so you go to work sick, and no guarantee of any paid vacation time whatsoever. In fact, there's only 4 other countries in the whole world, count them, in the whole world that don't give people some paid time off for vacation. They are Suriname, Guyana, Nepal, and that paragon of human rights, Burma, plus us. That's it. There's only one other country in the entire world that doesn't give mothers maternity leave when they have a baby. That's Papua New Guinea. We are unique. The United States is exceptional for all the wrong reasons, and that's the point that we have to make. So we need to build food and health and community by slowing down, and I love Vicki's slow food idea, slow time idea. It's something I've been working at for a long time. We also need a new vision to call what we want to call ourselves, this kind of society. I think the line new economy doesn't work very well. It's pretty vague. I'd like to ask us to return to an old phrase that used to describe exactly the kind of vision we want, with cooperatives and small local businesses. And yes, there's some big stuff too that is actually popularly run and controlled. That vision from the 1880s to the 1930s in the United States was called the Cooperative Commonwealth. And I believe it's something we should return to. So finally, to bring this to an end, on January the 11th, 1912, very cold day, thousands of workers, most of them women and most of them immigrants, left the textile mills of Lawrence, Massachusetts, to march in the snowy streets of that city, demanding a very small raise in pay from 16 to 18 cents an hour, and a cut in their working hours from 56 to 54 a week. And the story goes that as they marched in the streets, they carried in front of them a banner which read, "We want bread and roses too." And the bread was the symbol of the higher wages, which would have meant 4 more real loaves of bread on the tables for their poor kids. But those women, as poor as they were, knew that happiness wasn't about bread alone, that life was not about bread alone. As poor as they were, they knew they needed the roses. Time for art and love and beauty, time to smell the roses. And it's something I think we understood as a people for a long time. Yeah, until after World War II, until the consumer society, when we decided to put all the focus on the bread and the money and the stuff, and we left the roses to wilt. And I think it's time we water them again. Thank you.
How's everybody? So, I wouldn't be here standing today if it wasn't for the Arab Spring movement. And that's a big deal. You know, I'm 23 years old, so 4 years ago, I wouldn't be standing right here. I have a question. Can you raise your hand if you are 23 years old or younger? Okay, awesome. We have a few hands. Raise your hand if you're 30 years old or younger. Few more hands. Okay. Now raise your hand if you are 30 years old or younger in heart. There we go. A lot more hands. Awesome. But as you can tell, you know, we definitely are a room that is separated by age, by generation. And when I spend my time in the community, if I'm, you know, doing an action, if I'm, you know, going to a conference, if I'm, you know, planning, if I'm working to build a movement, what does the room look like? And that's a really important question. What does the room look like? How do we make sure that when we talk about building a sustainable world, a world that works for all, what kind of room do we need to have in order for us to get there? And now the other big thing about the Arab Spring movement, you know, this is a movement that started thousands and thousands of miles away from here. I've never been to Africa. I don't speak any languages other than English. How did this movement put me to where I am today, where I call myself a storyteller, civic entrepreneur? How did these things make me who I am? 60-second video. It was, and it went by Twitter, and it was a man. His name is Mohammed Bouazizi. A man who wanted equality, believed in human dignity, and believed that he had something to sacrifice to make that happen. And it started a fire across the entire world. This was 2011. It's 2011. I was 20 years old. I can't really tell you much about the first 18 years of my life. I grew up in a suburb. But I was so fortunate to be able to move to a city where there was a really strong community of people who thought about the future, who thought about equality and all the values that make us a better people. This is Portland. It's a great city. And I just remember that first day. I remember that first day going down to Occupy. I'd spent time doing community work before. I volunteered at a lot of nonprofits, but I never really figured that I could make a vision in my community and work towards that. But I was surrounded by 10,000s of people who I never saw before in my entire life. I recognized some people from volunteering, recognized some people from school, but this broad swath, this diversity of people, old and young and dark and light, and from all walks of life, just a diverse group of people all coming together to create a change they wanted to see in their community. That really shook me up. And it was really interesting because a lot of this happened because of social media. That's how we got the word out. Here in my city, we don't even have a daily newspaper anymore. How do people get the news when it doesn't come to your doorstep? We have libraries that aren't open every day. Just information, it's harder and harder for us to communicate to each other, even though we are starting to live closer together. And I remember, because of Occupy, I wanted to figure out ways that I could get the word out, because I wanted people to learn about what I was doing, profile all the awesome people I was working with. And when I was a kid, I remember, setting up my MySpace. I got my favorite, music videos. I put them on there. Nobody liked any of my music, apparently. It's a very lonely MySpace. But then MySpace wasn't cool anymore, and I had to create a Facebook, and I'd do it all over again, and nobody wanted to be my friend. And then they started Twitter, and I was like, no. I don't want to do Twitter. But then Occupy came around, and I realized how important this was as a tool. And I created an account called Occupy Saturn. And I've got like 160 followers on that. But it was really a good starting point where I could realize that content really does matter. We live in an age where a lot of people might say social media is a big problem. We have things like #TheDress. I'm still upset about that. Last week the golden blue or brown, I don't remember. But there's frustrating things going on. But I think about all the other movements that have happened, like Black Lives Matter or the People's Climate March. Really amazing movements that we've never seen before. And a lot of the strength from this comes from being able to use the technology, be able to use social media, and be able to use that as a platform of connection for social justice and human rights. And so that's what I came to talk about today. Came to talk about the fact that our message matters. How do we build a room that looks like this? And we have to be honest with ourselves about how much the times are changing in terms of power. We have to communicate power, and we have to recognize that the way that we communicate is the way that we make change. And so now I talked a little bit about social media. I also want to talk about the fact that I am 23 years old, and how do I get to this point where it's because of social media that I start caring about these things? And it's a big deal. I went to school. I went to a great school in Virginia, and we covered tons of topics. We covered literature. We covered history and science and math. I think I showed up to half my math classes, so don't ask me any calculus questions. But I had years of education, and the second that I graduated, I came out into the world, and I was so lost. I was so confused. How do I find community? What's next? How do I find meaning in my life? I didn't get a chance to really learn meaning in my school. But that shouldn't be the way things are. We have schools to build up our youth. And it's so important for us to have different platforms of education, whether it's co-learning or other systems that we want to do to educate ourselves. We should definitely work on that. But we still have this system in place, this broad system that works with so many of our youth. And they come out of that, many of them, without having a connection to their community. So that's one of the things that I've taken on here in Oregon. How do we make sure that all of us are educated and empowered and understand human rights, understand social justice, and understand what does it mean to be what I like to call active citizenship? And this means a lot of things. We have so many wise speakers on this stage. We have so many wise speakers in this audience, and we all are really good at a lot of things. How do we make sure that these are things that people think that they can do, they can learn from? How do we have role models and give them something to look forward to, as they become into adulthood? And this means so many things. This means, how do we change our business models so it shifts from capitalism to actually empowering and creating a stronger humanity? It's talking about electoral reform, whether you're running candidates or you're pushing policy. It's talking about the nonprofit sector. It's talking about being a neighborhood activist. How do you, do zoning or create food systems? All these things we don't talk about in our schools. So how do we make sure that we create standards so that all of our youth understand who they are and the change that they can make? So that's what I came here to share. I'm glad that you guys listened to me. And I also just want to put a plug in for Know Your City. I know you guys went on some of the tours. We actually are a really great nonprofit that also uses the system of capitalism to sell literature and tours on social justice and human rights. You guys can also make a donation if you want. We'll pass a hat around. No, I'm kidding. But these are, this is really important for us to talk about. How do we make sure that every generation comes to the table? We are a movement that's diverse, and we all need to be empowered as leaders to get us over the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We love Portland, and as I said, we hope to have an ongoing relationship with you guys. So, I first of all want to talk a little bit about the nature of the conference and then come to real wealth and explain that for many people it might seem very odd to have this combination. On the one hand, paleo diet, on the other hand, the magic vision of Charles, and on the other hand, measurements of, new measurements for GPI instead of GDP. A very broad mix we have here. I actually think that developing a certain axis for thinking of this can be helpful. I know that my colleague Charles will probably think of this as too Western and intellectualized, but I think that a certain axis to see the framing of all of this can be helpful. So our axis comes from having worked simultaneously in the least industrialized, urbanized parts of the world, and on the other side of the world, in your country, the most industrialized, the most urbanized, the most corporatized country in the world. Now, working on those extreme polar opposites in the world led us to come up with this bigger picture that we stand by and that we think is very useful. Now, as it turns out, that big picture is also about looking at where we are right now and where we might want to end up, or where we want to be. And as I try to say in my book, Ancient Futures, I see an intuitive turning, very similar to what Charles is talking about. There's an intuitive turning towards the magic, the beauty, the mystery, and the life of the natural world, turning towards nature. There is a huge shift going on where we are often in unconscious ways turning back to what ancient nature-based embedded cultures knew all along. That is, we are the natural world. Our health, the health of Mother Gaia are one. Our polarizing intellect, from our left brain, which only allowed us to see from here up, and where we started joining into this fragmented way of looking at the world, that we are separate from nature, that everything else can be understood by slicing it into neat slices, creating this reductionist, fragmented view through which we view the world. We're beginning to turn away from that in 1,000,001 ways. I mean, there are so many practices, of course, meditation being the most fundamental, but there are even now technologies that are probably quite valid in helping us to balance our brain back to a better equilibrium between that left brain, which we do need every time we take an action. We are using a type of analysis or reductionism, but every time we calm down and slow down and to contemplate the whole, it's the other side of the brain. So there is this ancient futures turning going on that we often don't see. But we believe, passionately believe, that, as I was saying in the opening evening, that we actually need to engage in a bit of both. In other words, we need what we often call both resistance and renewal. On the opening evening, I said something about practicing creative schizophrenia. And someone came up to me and said, don't use that word. I suffer from schizophrenia. Don't use that word. So I take that back. Another way to talk about it is that we need to engage in both resistance and renewal. The resistance part has to do with understanding that out of this trajectory where we started fragmenting our worldview and where we went along with the belief that we are separate from nature, that trajectory has continued in an economic system. It is a techno-economic system of big money linked to technology, taking us further and further away from the natural world, carrying us without us seeing the process. So one of the things that we need to do in terms of resistance is to understand what is that trajectory, how is that working? And as I think I said on the opening evening, it's crucial and really empowering to understand that the trade treaties, bilateral, multilateral, under WTO, outside the WTO, this has been a thread, a vehicle whereby our political leaders have gone along with deregulating global banks and corporations. Deregulating the multinationals has been about giving them freedom. And that freedom, as I said the other night, is about them being allowed to sue our government if our government protects the environment or our health or our well-being, our jobs. So please, please do pay attention to that. It will mean a bit of your intellectual left brain engaging. Don't have to become an economist. Do not have to read those trade treaties, which, by the way, only teams of lawyers can decipher. They are made by teams of lawyers, for teams of lawyers, who work for the corporations, and those same lawyers can represent a corporation in the morning, and in the afternoon they can stand as judges in these tribunals where the corporations sue government. It's utterly mad. We would be laughing this out of court, out of our world, out of our society, if we just knew about it. So there is this invisible thing going on in a trajectory that takes us further away from what we long for, which is that deeper connection. So do commit to at least devoting a little bit of your time to that resistance, while giving at least an equally big chunk of your time to the renewal. And what does the renewal look like? Well, a while back, I made a bit of a list of the wealth that this ancient Ladakhi culture had that I knew so intimately, and also Bhutan, where I worked over a 5-year period. In these cultures and others that I came to know, there was this incredible real wealth. And these are just some of the factors that wealth consisted of. Daily exercise and movement. But we're talking hours. We're not talking about running in frantically to a gym, to spend half an hour. We're talking about most of the day being able to move with your body. And I hope you know the doctors who are now urging us to get up from our computer every 15 minutes just to move about. One of the best things we can do for longevity and health. They had fresh, healthy, local food as a given. They had plenty of time, and as we've been hearing, the importance of time, plenty of time. Leisure time and, time to do everything at a human pace. We are running after our technologies. We need another whole conference just to look at how we're ending up trying to keep up with the speed of our technologies, rather than allowing our technologies to really serve us. This is why we're running so fast. Everyone engaged in song, music making, and dance. Another incredible gift. It's one of the most wonderful things we can do together to celebrate life, to feel our own empowerment. Singing is like an inner yoga, just the breathing. And as we sing one tone together, it's one of the closest ways of coming to to that sense of spiritual connectedness. Meaningful work, meaning that people had the right and the ability to see the product of their labors, to actually see that they had done something, accomplished something. There was no such thing as unemployment. And remember, there are still many cultures living in what we call the poorest of the poor parts of the world that have this wealth. No unemployment. You felt empowered because along with that economy where you could see the products of your labor and where you were actually engaged in doing something productive, you were living at a scale where you could see that your voice, your productivity actually translated into power over your own self-determination. We need localization for all these reasons, but that's one of the key reasons. We need to decentralize so that we have that greater power and determination over our lives. We're not going to go back to decentralizing to the extent of these traditional cultures, but there are certain key elements like these that I believe we must regain. Maybe one of the most important gifts was that in a more human-scale community fabric, as young people grew up, they had the great privilege of being loved for who they are, being seen close to hand, knowing that the love and the support they were getting came from people who knew them as they were, not because they were wearing the Nike running shoes or looked the right way as the media was determining. Part of that was, of course, this community web where you had a sense of interdependence. Vicki has already spoken beautifully about it. So the interdependence where you know you can count on your neighbor and your neighbor knows they can count on you, in that situation you have a natural gift culture. There's so much that gets exchanged without needing money to intervene. However, from where we are today, it's clear that we do need money to make the transition, and ultimately we'll probably want to end up with a certain degree of monetarization, but a massive step towards decommercialization. The community fabric, and I talked about that earlier, central to that was the intergenerational fabric where old and young were together day and night. An incredible wealth for both the young and the old. Access to wild nature. Being able to peek into the miraculous wealth of wild nature and having that usually as a daily experience. And that in turn was completely inextricably tied to beauty as Sandra was talking about yesterday, to the beauty of the natural world. And this in turn was also part of a cultural way of being where your spiritual connections to the living world and to other human beings, your spiritual connections were an experience of every day linked to traditions of quieting the mind, of quite consciously encouraging a spirituality which, as I experienced it in these cultures, was more along the lines of what Eckhart Tolle says in The Power of Now. In other words, it took me many years to realize that what I was witnessing was people who were moving in and out of that expansive, quiet mind and space, and then saying, "How are you today? Did you go to the village today?" And then again, "Om Mani Padme Hum," as they spun their prayer wheel. And then back again to continue the conversation. So literally mid-sentence, I came to realize that people moved in and out of that quiet space that Catherine described earlier today. So this is why, this is a little bit of an explanation, why are we covering such a broad church, but how it's all connected, because everything in life is connected. Thank you.
What we need is not scaling up of those solutions, but scaling out of those solutions, replication in millions of these variety of solutions, innovative solutions that are emerging. It's quite possible.
What we need to do is to actually create platforms in which these sorts of initiatives are able to get together, are able to synergize, are able to actually build those larger narratives, are able to begin to change the public discourse.
We're trying to create an alliance, an international alliance for localization, because we need a united no, one giant no to a continuation of that system. And at the same time, we need to see ourselves as actually part of an enormous movement involving hundreds of millions of people that are saying many yeses to diverse ecosystems, diverse cultures, diverse identities. This is about reclaiming our right to be who we are in our different ways of being. It's about reclaiming the diversity that is life.